Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well, and it is time for a review of the brand new Future album, Future Hendrix Presents The WIZRD. Don't do it! Don't you do it! Future, he doesn't make music for you. He doesn't make music for you. He doesn't make the music for you. You're not sipping that perp. You're not about that life. Please stop! This is the latest full-length album from Atlanta, Georgia hip-hop phenomenon Future. Ever since Future popped up on the trap radar earlier this decade, he's been nothing but a bona fide hit machine. Same Damn Time, Mask Off, Turn on the Lights, Move That Dope, the song Jumpman, the collaborative cut off of his album with Drake, just to name a very select few. And Future seems to churn out so many bangers just by virtue of putting out so much material on the whole. And even though Future does put out a lot of music, his ratio to what hits and what doesn't is definitely better than that of his contemporaries who are putting out as much material. Most likely because he works with a very simple, bold, effective formula that just works. Future's husky and rappy croons that usually barrel right through the auto-tune that his voice is soaked in. He also tends to hop on some very blunt and trippy instrumentals. Not to mention he was pushing trap in more psychedelic directions before Travis Scott was making waves with Rodeo. So Future has been a lot of things across his career so far. Incredibly catchy, consistent, distinct, and ahead of the curve. Really everything but versatile, which has pretty much worked against every Future project so far in my opinion, because if I can boil Future's style or his biggest shortcoming down to one sentence, it would be a pretty good idea stretched out to the point where it's lost its appeal. Which is sad because I do think Future does have a pretty distinct sound, and his albums and mixtapes could be improved greatly just with some very simple changes and additions to his usual formula. And for the most part, the WIZRD does present those changes. Now don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying that Future has turned over a new leaf and he's become a completely different artist. The lyrics on this record are very flashy and braggy, a lot of nods to money and sex and dope. Occasionally some clever wordplay or some introspection over a struggle that he's gone through or going through. Sonically on this thing, you're still gonna hear a lot of warbly auto-tune vocals and trap beats and wavy vibes. But you know what? Not every song on this record is shooting for the same vibe. There's a pretty good mix of aggressive and gritty and also surreal bangers on this thing. Some passionate ballads too, if you can believe it, where Future is almost having like an emotional internal monologue. Future's vocal style, his singing voice, is still not going to be for everybody, but it's there. Especially on the track Crazy But It's True, where I love Future's flow on this thing, especially on the hook where it sounds like he's almost out of breath. It's crazy, but it's true. The song essentially sees him ranting about being owed respect for his influence because there are few artists, in my opinion, that have been bitten as mercilessly by his contemporaries as Future. Meanwhile, the instrumentals are a bit more detailed this time around, offer some prettier layers than I think we've heard on past Future works. Occasionally they get kind of weird, as do Future's flows. I also think Future's gotten a lot better on this record at throwing a catchy idea out there, and if he doesn't have any way of extending it beyond a few minutes of novelty in a single song, he just kind of ends it there. No kind of dragging a single repetitive, redundant idea out for 5 minutes or 4 minutes and change to the point where I just get sick of it. Really, the only track that approaches that for me is the opening cut, Never Stop. And even though Future, as he starts to approach that 5-minute mark, he begins to lose me, there are still a lot of worthwhile things about this song. I do like the pretty and glamorous instrumental. The flow Future presents is ever-changing, as this is one of a few cuts on here where it seems like he's in the middle of an emotional rant. The following Jumpin' on a Jet by comparison goes much harder, even though I'm not really crazy about this one either. Not because it goes on too long, but it's one of several tracks on here that by all means just seems like Future by the numbers, Stick to the Models, and Ain't Coming Back. Just a few songs that seem like they could have been slipped into any number of Future projects and they wouldn't have sounded out of place. Just, again, very average for Future. Digging deeper into the record though, Future actually hits a really great stride with this album, especially in the first leg. The song Rocket Ship, I love the eerie, minimal vibe of this track. The evil and smooth bass, the chilling chorus vocals that pop in on the second half, and Future's mantra, I've been popping since is my demo, bitch. One of this record's many hilariously egotistical phrases that are just fried into my brain. Future goes melodic on the following track, Temptation, which actually features some really nice vocal harmonies and some kind of quirky vocal samples as well. I mean, at its core, this song very much feels like Future's usually clunky and weirdly melodic style, but it's layered out to the point where it's got some beautiful harmony and body to it. It's kind of refined, and if we look at the lyrics, they seem almost confessional on some bars, where Future kind of gets into his inability to deal with his own temptations. The song Crushed Up is pure orgasmic euphoria. The chimey, swirling arpeggios in both channels, the distant, funny reed melodies, plus the hypnotic rhythms and Future's mantra on this track, diamonds crushed up in the face, I could see it. Yeah, there's a lot of flash and materialism throughout the bars on this track, but the way Future goes on to describe it, combined with the instrumental, it seems dreamlike and surreal. Like Future isn't rapping about his real life or an experience that he's had, but more like a psychedelic vision. The song FNN sounds like the exact true blue formula for a Future hit, complete with an earworm hook, FNN. FNN. But the song has been built up with these incredible synth layers to give it this kind of panoramic widescreen feel. Also, there is a heavy and aggressive beat switch in the second half of this track that's like, what? What? Future's doing beat switches now? What? The song literally just explodes into banger mode in the second half, and this is one of actually several tracks on this record that features some really cool quality beat switches, and that's something, in my opinion, that is so refreshing to hear from Future. I love it on the song BAPTIIZE. I love it on the incredibly funny and tense Talk Shit Like a Preacher. Future also peppers the track list in the second half of this record with some weird moments that kind of stand out for their oddity, like the song Overdose, where, yeah, the instrumental's a little repetitive and everything, but Future's flow on this cut is it's a little relentless, and there are multiple times mid-rap where he's kind of stopping to laugh at the line that he just said, like he's kind of just having a giggle at his own verse. Not one of my favorite tracks on the record, but certainly stands out for that weird characteristic alone. Then there's also the song GOIN, DUMMI, which features this strangely cute vocal melody, maybe one of the cutest to ever pop up in a Future song. I love the track's slightly sunburnt, but also wintry synth leads that kind of overlap, cascading over one another with a delay. The instrumental sounds like a trap remix of my favorite SNES game's winter level music. And also another track on this record that feels wonderfully dreamy. Then Future goes totally unhinged on the song FACESHOT. Future delivers one of his most amped performances on the entire record here, and I love the incredibly grimy instrumental and the slightly industrial synths on the mix too. It's like there's a kind of adventurous progression to the entire project where Future seems to be taking more risks and doing more weird stuff as the album moves along. However, he does save some of the worst moments on this record for last, especially on the closing cut, where his flow just starts to slur to the point where he's almost unintelligible, which is something that I didn't really care for in much of his earlier work. Believe it or not, Future has done a lot better in recent years to be a bit more readable, lyrically speaking, in his songs, which I really do appreciate. And not that I'm against things in general like mumble rap, especially when it comes to an artist like Future, because much of the time the appeal of his music boils down to the energy and the vibe of it. But when your articulation is so off that your syllables lose punctuation and your flow doesn't really have that strong of a sense of rhythm and pacing, a lot of what you're rapping and a lot of what you're saying can seem very samey. However, that is not the case for a great deal of the material on the WIZRD. It's the exact opposite. I would argue Future is actually really lively and even borders on electrifying on some of these cuts. But again, with the exception of the songs on here that seem kind of average for him, and again, that closer that features such lyrical gems as I'm Future Hendrix, but I'm not a guitarist. Oh, that's not a good one. As far as the features on this album go, like usual with Future, there aren't that many, which is something that over the years I kind of respect him for. He doesn't tend to lean all that heavily on whatever talent he can bring onto his album outside. But still, Travis Scott is on here featured on the song First Off, which I feel like this song suffers from the same problem that 90% of Travis Scott featured songs do, and that the psychedelic vibes combined with his relentless ad-libs just sort of make the track feel like a Travis Scott song that just features the artist to the song should be spotlighting because it's his song, but I digress. Then there's the song Unicorn Perp with Young Thug and Gunna, and I admit I'm kind of torn on this song. While I do love what Young Thug brings to the table, the ad-libs he throws all over the song behind Future are insane and animated and bring a lot of flavor and character to the cut. Gunna's performance, though, in the second half is absolutely boring and flabby and uninspired. He just sounds like a tired Young Thug. After saying all that, I still think Future Hendrix's The WIZRD here is the most entertaining thing he's done to date. Now, keep in mind, it's maybe not his most hype release. It's not his most cutting-edge record either, like DS2. That record was certainly a sea change for psychedelic trap. I don't think The WIZRD really does anything all that novel in the grander scheme of things for Future, but I do think he layers, matures, and refines his sound to the point where it's a bit more dynamic. There's a little more subtlety to it. There's a little more nuance to it. You can kind of dive into some of these tracks and get some interesting details out of them. I also think Future provides some really sticky and memorable hooks on this thing too. Gives some good vocal performances, emotional and aggressive. And I'm actually monstrously happy about that. I'm happy to hear a Future project that I can enjoy more than just a couple of tracks at a time and that's it. While sure, still he's not the most versatile artist under the sun, and I do think the album does have some serious lyrical shortcomings. The start of it is pretty weak. The ending of it is kind of weak as well, but that is not stopping me from feeling a light to decent 7 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Future Hendrix, The WIZRD, forever.